Welcome to Learn Smart Coding, the ultimate destination for mastering cutting-edge tech skills. From front-end framework to the back-end system, our video covers it all. With real-time demos and in-depth tutorials, we'll teach you how to code like a pro. Subscribe now and start your journey to becoming a smart coder. Hello friends, in this video we're going to talk about the configuration in the Docker-based .NET application. This is developing .NET 7 apps with Docker, part 3. Come, let's dive in. So here is our project solution. Let's set up this Learn Smart Coding API as the startup project. So let's do that first. And then if you go to the configuration, the appsettings.json, we're going to add some configuration here. Okay, so I'm going to add something called connection string. Under connection string, there is a key called db context, where your db context connection string will be there, and there'll be a simple property and a nested property. Okay, so now let's go to the program.cs, and here what we will do is we will try to read the configuration value. And this is common if you have used .NET Core, how you used to read the value from the configuration file. But let's take a look at one more time. So here in the .NET 7 app, you can have a builder.configuration, assign that to a variable, so you'll have the reference of the configuration. So now what you can do is you can use that and access the connection string. So there is an inbuilt method called getConnectionString. You pass the connection string the key property name, right? So that's a db context. So we will get that data and put it in one variable. Similarly, there's another method called getValue. You cast it to the string because eventually the data which is stored in the configuration is a string, and then you use that, right? So that's a simple property. The next one is the inventory.nested property. So basically any nested property that you use like this, right? The inventory.nested property, you need to use the colon. Remember, you need to use the colon for all the nested property. Okay, so that's how it happens. And if there is a low level another property after the nested property, another colon followed by the nested property, then name. That's how it works. Alright, so once you have this, if I run the application, you can actually see the application is running, and we have a simple log.for context, and we are logging all the context of these properties. Okay, so it's loaded, and these properties are logged in one single place. That's called loaded configuration. So you can see the connection string, you can see the inventory, you can see the simple property, all the data that is there on the appsettings.json. So that's the first thing. So it goes and reads the appsettings.json. Now what we are going to do is we're going to override based on the environment specific. So we have something called development environment. So if I put a property, the nested property in the development, and if you run this application, right, so this is the old one, that one I'm highlighting, that's the old one. But if you run the application, what will happen is after the configuration, the environment based configuration property will override. So you can see the previous one and then the latest one. The latest one shows you are doing wonderful, right? So you're doing wonderful is the value coming from the development.json. Now let's do the similar logging mechanism in the console application, which is our invoice generator. So because it's a console application, by default there won't be any app settings.json, so we need to add it. So I'm going to bring up a piece of code. So this piece of code, what it will do is it will read the base location of the base directory of the project, and then it will add the JSON file, and then followed by the environmental file. So in our case, the appsettings.json followed by the add environmental variables. Alright, having said this, we will have a static variable called iConfiguration. So right now there is the packages are not installed, that's why you don't get to see the suggestions to include the environmental configuration namespace. So I'm going to comment it, open up the project, and show you what are the packages that is required. If you double click on the project, you see extension.configuration.binder environmental variable followed by the configuration.json. These three packages are required. I copy pasted it, saved it, build it. Now if I go back to program.cs, if I go there, you can actually bring in the namespace, which is Microsoft extension.configuration. I'll uncomment this as well. You can go and check this commented link for more details. So now we added this the similar logging mechanism in the console application also, right? So the first one is the app settings. So right now we don't have app settings. What you have to do is, this is a console application, so right click, do a add, and then choose a file. So you need to do a new file. Like it will ask you what kind of files you need to choose it. So right click, add new item, and when it comes, click on show all templates, filter by JSON. Then you will get to see the JSON configuration. Choose it, give a name, appsettings.json, right? And then click on add. You will add the appsettings.json file. Now I'm going to copy paste the exact same properties from the main project to this project, and we can modify a little bit in the content so that you know from where this logging is happening. If you remember the previous logging part 2 we saw, we added logging mechanism for all the projects. Now we are adding the configuration in all the project to make sure it is able to read the configuration in the right way, in the right manner. Okay, so now we have to make sure right click on the file and then do a build action as content, and then copy to output directory whenever it is newer. Okay, so whenever there's a change, it detects, it copies and pastes it, and then we are all set. Right now we are good. And you can also see, if you go to the project file, it will see whatever we did in the properties. It will come here as item group, whatever action you did, right? So now we will set this as a startup project, and we will choose Docker as the starter, and then we will run it. So it goes and logs in the seek, the serilog.sync.seek. Now I forgot to copy paste the logging mechanism, right? So I copied the content what we have it in the previous project, and then I'm going to paste it in the try catch, the try block. So now here instead of config, it is just a underscore config. I will replace that. Rest of the code is all same. Okay, we are reading the configuration value, we are dumping into a context. We will create a context and we're going to dump the properties. Now I'm refreshing a couple of times. You can see the loaded configuration is now having the console app logs. So by this we know how to set up the logging, how to read the configuration even for the console application. So for good. And one thing you should remember, the colon is very important. For any nested property, the colon is what you have to do. Now the next interesting thing is, let's set up this environment variable in the Docker file. Think of what will happen if I set this properties, which is then the appsettings.json. Those are all environmental variables, right? If I set that environmental variable in the Docker file here, you see this simple property in the start and the simple property in the end. Here we will have a value that represents that it's coming from the Docker file. And also in the launch settings.json, here also based on what you're launching, right? If it is a HTTP or Docker or the IAS, you can actually set up the environmental variables. So I will set up an environmental variables here. The first one is the development, and then the next one is a simple property. So I have a simple property in the Docker file. I have a simple property in the Docker launch setting. Okay, remember, that's how it works. So in order to identify from where the data is coming, we have we have put the content accordingly, that it is coming from launch setting, it is coming from Docker file. Now what we are going to do is, we are going to set up this project as the startup project, the first project, and then run the Docker. So now you know there is a file, the configuration setting in the Docker file, as well as the launch setting. Like you guessed, what will happen is, if I open up the loaded configuration, okay, you can see the first one, the nested property is the simple property that we changed. See, it's coming from launch setting. It is not coming from the Docker file, because launch setting will override the Docker file environmental file because it's launching, right? So that's how it works. So you know how the environment files are picked up from where. That's important. So we know how to configure this in various places. Now what we will do is, we will add the nested property also, the inventory underscore the nested property. Here when you put this into this launch setting, the colon will be replaced by double underscore. Okay, and then when the application is working, application knows to replace double underscore into the colon. Okay, so remember that environmental variable, when you use the nested property, you will be using a double underscore for any nested property that will replace the colon. Now I launched again. Now let's see what happens to the loaded configuration. Okay, so I'm gonna open up and you can see this is coming from the Docker file. You know why? Simple property is now no more there in the launch setting, and that's why it is now picking up from the Docker file. So now let's quickly see how you can add the same environmental variables in the Visual Studio Code, right? So if you go to Visual Studio Code, there is something called .vs code and there is something called task.json. Okay, so the task.json will hold the environmental variables, like the variables that we used in the launch settings and all the other places. You can override from here. So the launch setting is not there in the Visual Studio Code. Launch setting will never be launched. Instead, it is task.json. Okay, so under the task.json, if you come all the way through down, there is something called docker run in the release mode. Okay, so there is one thing called in the debug mode, one is in the release mode. Anything that you put under the docker run with the env, which stands for the environment, if you put an environmental variable under this, okay, like I do, it's almost same. Colon will be replaced with double colon, the double underscore. If you do that, this will be taken for the release version, but we are going to talk about the debug version, so I will cut that and put it under the debug version. Debug version, there is already something called ASP.NET Core, ASP.NET Core underscore environment, right? So there you can put all these environmental variable, and as long as the environmental variables are here, when you launch the application, it will load from there. Now the next interesting thing that we will talk about is the debug logging, debug view. So I'm going to copy paste a piece of code and we're going to talk about the get debug view. Okay, so I'm casting the configuration and as the configuration root. So in our case, it is just a config. Now config, it is giving me that I don't need to cast explicit. Config itself is the configuration root, so I'm going to use directly the config, which is nothing but the builder.configuration. Okay, so there is a method called get debug view. If you run this get debug view, be cautious. This is only for the development purpose. This will dump a lot of information into the serilog.seek.sync. So whenever you use this, it's only for good debugging purpose, not for the protection purpose. Okay, so do not use this for the protection purpose. Now if I dump it, you see this, not just the properties, it's dumping where is the property coming from. If you take a look at one property, like for example environment variable or port, or maybe the property that we built, right, the connection string. So it shows you where is the connection string, the content, and it also shows you from where this connection string is picked up. The connection string is picked up from the appsettings.json, not the environment. Similarly, if you look at the nested property, it will tell you it has been picked up from the development, or it will also tell you if it is picked from the Docker file, it is picked from the launch setting. So remember, get debug view is only for debugging purpose, good for development, not for the production. I hope you enjoyed. We spoke about the configuration in the .NET, and that's it for this video. And in the next video, we will talk about the building Docker images for the .NET Core application. So where we will build the image, we will be able to pull the image. We will show you how to launch the images and the containers. Thank you. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more tech tutorials. And don't forget to hit the bell icon to get notified when we post new videos. If you have any questions or suggestions, leave them in the comments below. Happy coding!